Over the years, the more and more I mixed, the more and more I came to love using saturation. In fact, these days I'm pretty much indifferent to any new EQ or compressor plugin that comes out. Kind of all been done, but I am usually eager to try any new flavor of saturation. So in this video, you're going to get a rundown of my 3 favorite saturation plugins and why they're so magical. All right, so let's just dive right into a session here. The first magical saturation plugin on the list is the SOUNDTOYS Decapitator. This thing is super versatile. It can go anywhere from subtle, although sometimes it's hard to be subtle with this one, but it can do a nice subtle saturation. And then you can also just completely mangle and distort stuff. You see this punish knob here. But let me show you what this is doing on the drums in this mix. Listen to how much it just fills out the drums, and also on the snare, it just adds some extra attack. Also got it on the crush bus as well, my parallel compression. If I bypass both of those, then I'll throw them back on. Sounds kind of, it sounds like a good drum mix, but a little bit kind of lacking that extra energy and punch, and the Decapitator really does a great job adding that. I most often end up using the E mode here, which I believe is an SSL style saturation. It's got a nice kind of edgy, high mid bite to it. But it also kind of adds some fatness as well. There's all the other modes as well, the A, N, T, P. I don't know what all of them are. I'm pretty sure this is API. This is a Neve. Do occasionally use those. I'd say maybe 80% of the time I'm on the E mode though. But let's check out the rest of this mix. I've got it on E mode on the bass guitar here. And like I said, you can really push this thing. I typically don't use it like that. I'm more so using it in kind of a more subtle way. But if we listen to the guitars here, you can see this time I got it in an N mode because the guitars they sound good, but it's kind of fizzy, got a little bit of that harshness in the high end. So the N mode here just kind of fattens up the low mids. Crank it up a bit so you can hear more. Hear how it's not darkening them necessarily, but it is adding some more fatness to it. You can hear that on this lead guitar section as well. Again, using the N mode. Check this out. Again, it's a little subtle, but it is filling it out. I've even got it on the vocals on this mix.
We're gonna drown in the river. I cannot swim any farther. My blood is pumping so fast to my heart and limbs underwater.
Again, subtle, just adding that extra 5 or 10% of energy and excitement to the sound. Super versatile plugin. In fact, I've done entire mixes where the Decapitator is pretty much the only saturation plugin I used in the whole mix, and just mixing and matching those different modes and just using it subtly here and there really, really works well. Now, you might be wondering, like, when should you use saturation in the mix? When should you reach for a plugin like that instead of an EQ or a compressor or a limiter? Well, how I like to think of saturation is it's helping make a sound more of what it already is, kind of bringing out more of what's good about a source tone. And I also think of it as kind of filling in the gaps. So you kind of heard even on the drums, the guitar tracks there, it's just kind of fattening it up, filling in the low mid. Sometimes it's filling in kind of maybe some high mid bite that's missing depending on the saturation you're using. So just kind of taking a sound and wanting to make it more of what it is and have it still sound the way it sounds. You're not trying to totally alter it with, let's say, EQ, but you just want it to take up more space in the mix. I find saturation is great for that. I often find myself reaching for a saturation plugin a lot more often when it comes to filling in low mids and trying to fatten sounds up. Just doing a EQ boost at like 300 hertz or 400 hertz, it's like, I don't know, I find it a little hard to make that sound good. But instead, if you use saturation, it's generating harmonics based on what's there and filling in those gaps in a much more musical way. Now, another way that I think about using saturation is to control and shape transients. So if we look at the drums here, if you watch me turn up the drive knob here in the saturation, but also watch the drum bus meter right here, you're going to hear the drums getting louder, but the transients are not necessarily peaking anymore. You see how at that point it just kind of like it starts shaving off the transients, like the meters are not peaking more, even though it sounds louder in the mix. Different saturation plugins do it differently, but it's kind of like there's a ceiling and the transient's hitting it, and the saturation is going to kind of absorb some of that. It's going to either gently kind of roll it off and compress it, or in kind of this case, like Decapitator and E mode here, it sounds to me more like almost like a harder kind of clipping distortion sound, which sometimes works really well on aggressive drums, snare drums, stuff like that. So that's another way to think of it, as basically controlling transients. And it's kind of a pro tip for getting more loudness in your mix is kind of shaving off some of those peaks in a musical way, bringing up kind of the more average volume and the lower level sounds in the source tone, and that's going to give you more overall loudness. That's what a lot of mastering engineers do, is just these subtle steps of saturation that are just kind of shaving off those peaks in a musical way that's not killing the attack and vibe of it, but it's allowing you to kind of push everything else up higher. Now, saturation can also be great the other way. So instead of trying to make something more aggressive, it can actually smooth out some of the aggressive transients or kind of high bitey frequencies. And so that brings me to the next plugin on my list. Now, I'm really sorry, all the non-Pro Tools users out there, but this plugin rules. It's MASSEY Tapehead. So I love it on kick, snare, occasionally on bass, occasionally on vocals, anything where I need to fatten up some low end, or something where I need to smooth out some high end. So check it out here on this snare top track. So listen to the high end and then also listen to the low end here. Here I was just a little bit weak and thin, and then with the tape head in, all of a sudden we've got some low end body, and the high end is like, it's not too dark. The high end's still there, but it sounds much smoother. And I honestly don't know what's happening under the hood of this plugin, but it's really great. Sounds great on kick as well. I use it all the time on kick drum to, again, add some low mid punch without it sounding too boxy and muddy. Here's bypassed. Yeah, and a little bit thin. Adding some nice body there. So really awesome plugin, Tapehead. You can also push it harder and kind of, again, distort that transient a little bit, but it does it in a softer way. It's not as aggressive sounding as like Decapitator. Another one of my favorite uses for MASSEY Tapehead is on lead guitars, like high gain guitars that are kind of high up on the neck, and it has like really like fizzy, harsh tone in the high end. Tapehead is just like, it just does a magical thing. It just like smooths off all of those harsh high frequencies and allows you to actually go in and actually make it brighter after the fact, but it just sounds so much smoother. So check that out if you're ever dealing with those sorts of guitars and you're a Pro Tools user. And I kind of love that it's mysterious. Like, it's not like an EQ where you get distracted by your eyes because you're looking at the frequency graphs, or compression when you're getting kind of swayed by what you're seeing on the gain reduction meter. When you're using a saturation plugin like Tapehead or Decapitator or anything, you really are just, you have to listen. You just have to listen, and you turn the knob and either it's better or it's not. And you just use your ears and make that decision. So that's another reason why I really love using saturation, is because you don't get distracted by that stuff, and you just have to make the decision with your ears alone. Okay, next plugin. Again, I'm sorry, this is really just going to be for Pro Tools users, unfortunately. Hey, if you're not on Pro Tools, just use Decapitator. Like I said, it's super versatile. I've done mixes only with that plugin. But Number 3 on my list is the CRANESONG Phoenix plugin. Now, Phoenix is kind of expensive relative to a lot of other plugins out there, but I love it. I think it's worth it. It's simply, to me, it is the best at doing what I mentioned in terms of making a sound take up more space in the mix, making it more of what it is, kind of filling in those gaps in a really nice musical way. I haven't found one that I like as much as Phoenix. I love it on bass and guitars. That's usually where I use it most. And again, like I said, I don't reach for EQ to add fatness and low mids to bass and guitars. I put Phoenix on. Pretty huge effect here. Let's just zero in on the left side. It's got different modes, luminescent, iridescent, all these names. Basically, as you get familiar with the plugin, kind of each one does a different thing. So obviously the dark essence one is going to add more of the lower focused frequencies to kind of add more fatness. It might soak up a bit more of the high end, which you can hear is happening on this track. Amazing. I wouldn't be able to achieve with an EQ what this is doing to the low mids of the guitars. Now, Phoenix is my go-to saturation when I don't really want it to sound heavy-handed or edgy or add any sort of audible distortion necessarily, but more, again, when I just want to subtly make something a little bigger and have it take up a little more space in the mix. So drum buses, it's great. Individual drum tracks, bass, guitars, like I said, and vocals, I use it a lot as well. Phoenix is probably my most used saturation plugin over the past 10 years. You don't really see that much of it on YouTube channels and tutorials because it is more expensive and it is limited to Pro Tools, but among a lot of working pros that I know, it is very popular and it has been for a long time. So there you go, SOUNDTOYS Decapitator, MASSEY Tapehead, CRANESONG, Phoenix, or Phoenix 2. These are my 3 favorite magical saturation plugins and some quick demos of how I use them in a mix. And within the box mixing, this type of saturation, it is essential because it's kind of adding back in what you lose with digital compared to analog. Like we don't have that natural saturation that happens with hardware. We have to recreate that and kind of fake that in the box. And so that's where you can really add size and warmth and depth and glue to your mix. Now, speaking of depth, I want you to go and check out this video where I give you a dead simple but amazingly effective tip for creating more depth in your mixes. And no, it is not even a reverb or a delay. Check it out, and we'll talk to you soon.